In this video, I'm about to show you 35 jarred food brands to stay away from no matter what, and 10 to actually get in your kitchen, starting with number 35, Ragu. There was a time when Ragu tasted like real tomatoes simmered on the stove. Those days are gone. After Unilever sold the brand to Mizcan America in 2014, the ingredient list ballooned with high fructose corn syrup, modified starches, and soybean oil, none of which were in the original 1937 recipe. The result? 1/2 cup serving now packs 9 to 10 grams of added sugar and around 480 to 520 milligrams of sodium, according to the USDA Branded Foods database. That's nearly a quarter of an older adult's recommended daily sodium intake in just half a cup. Then came the 2019 FDA recall. Glass fragments were found in multiple Ragu flavors, forcing a nationwide pull. No injuries were reported, but it highlighted cost-cutting in packaging oversight. Independent tests from Consumer Reports also show cheaper tomato paste blends and less fiber than comparable sauces. Bottom line, Ragu stopped being real sauce years ago. It's now a mass-produced, sugar-heavy, salt-loaded product that tastes like nostalgia but behaves like junk food. Number 34, Prego. I'm almost certain you remember Prego's 1,982nd slogan, "It's in there!" Back then, it actually meant herbs, olive oil, and thick tomato puree. Today, what's in there is mostly corn syrup, canola oil, and salt. A single half cup of Prego Traditional contains 10 grams of added sugar and about 470 milligrams of sodium, according to the USDA Branded Foods database. That's roughly 40% more sugar than Ragu, and nearly a fifth of an adult's daily sodium cap in one small serving. The cost-cutting shows elsewhere, too. In 2020, Campbell's Soup Company recalled thousands of jars after consumers found plastic pieces floating in the sauce, an official Class 2 FDA recall. The company blamed a foreign material incident at one of its plants, a symptom of how automated bottling lines have replaced the slower quality check process Prego once bragged about. Add to that the calcium chloride and citric acid preservatives now used to stretch shelf life, and it's clear Prego isn't the hearty family sauce it used to be. It's convenience in a jar, with the nutritional profile of fast food. Number 33, Classico. For years, Classico's glass jars and Made the Italian Way labels fooled shoppers into thinking they were getting authentic sauce. But after Kraft Heinz took full control, Classico turned from rustic to corporate. The white pasta sauce recall in May 2024 proved it. The FDA announced that jars could contain glass fragments, forcing a recall across multiple states. It wasn't the first time either. Prior inspection reports cited packaging defects tied to cost-cutting in glass suppliers. Even when the jars aren't contaminated, the ingredient list reads like a chemistry project. The creamy Alfredo variant lists modified food starch, soybean oil, disodium phosphate, and enzyme-modified cheese, none of which belong in true Alfredo. A half cup delivers 460 milligrams of sodium and 4.5 grams of saturated fat, per the USDA Branded Foods database. That's nearly a quarter of what a senior should consume in an entire day. Classico isn't Italian anymore, it's industrial comfort food wrapped in nostalgia. What used to be cream and cheese is now preservatives and fillers that make it shelf-stable, not kitchen-worthy. Number 32, Bertolli. Once upon a time, Bertolli was the gold standard of imported Italian sauces, rich olive oil, ripe tomatoes, and real cheese. But after Unilever sold the brand to Mizcan America in 2014, the recipe quietly changed. The imported from Italy label stayed, but the ingredients didn't. Many Bertolli sauces now use US or Canadian tomato paste, canola, and soybean oil instead of extra virgin olive oil, and added sugar to mask the flavor loss. Then came the 2022 FDA recall. Certain Bertolli Alfredo sauces were pulled for undeclared milk allergens, a serious oversight for anyone with dietary restrictions. Nutritionally, the creamy versions are no better. 1/2 cup of Bertolli Alfredo packs 530 milligrams of sodium and 6 grams of saturated fat, according to the USDA database. Even more telling, lab analyses by Consumer Reports in 2023 showed Bertolli's extra virgin olive oil didn't meet EU purity standards. That's not a sign of Italian craftsmanship. That's cost-cutting disguised as tradition. Bertolli used to be Sunday quality in a jar. Now it's corporate sauce pretending to be Italian. Number 31. Vlasic pickles. There was a time when Vlasic pickles were known for that loud, satisfying crunch, the sound of quality, as the 1970s commercials bragged. But since Conagra Brands took over, that crunch has been replaced by industrial brine and bloated sodium. According to the USDA Branded Food Products Database, a single Vlasic dill spear can contain 780 milligrams of sodium, and just 3 spears push you over 2,300 milligrams, the entire daily sodium limit for adults. Beyond the salt, quality control has slipped. In 2021, Conagra issued a Class 2 recall after inspectors found swollen and leaking jars, a red flag for potential microbial spoilage. Several consumer reports described the brine turning cloudy within days of opening, a symptom of cheap stabilizers and reduced acidity. Vlasic used to be made with basic ingredients: cucumbers, water, vinegar, salt. Now the label reads like a lab sample: calcium chloride, polysorbate 80, and artificial flavor. What was once the pickle aisle's crunchy king is now a high-sodium chemical soak in a nostalgic jar. Number 30. Mount Olive. If you grew up seeing those bright yellow Mount Olive lids lined up at church picnics, you probably thought small-town quality. But the only thing small today is the flavor. The company still loves to brag about being from Mount Olive, North Carolina, yet it's now one of the largest pickle producers in America, pushing out hundreds of millions of jars a year for Walmart and Costco. Crack one open and you'll get hit with the new recipe: more brine than bite. The classic vinegar tang has been replaced by a salty chemical sting, courtesy of calcium chloride and polysorbate 80, additives that keep soggy cucumbers looking fake crisp. Lab data backs it up. A single spear runs 700 milligrams of sodium, about a third of your daily limit in one crunch. And let's not forget the 2023 recall after bits of glass were found in certain jars. Hard to call it homemade when you're risking a chipped tooth. Mount Olive hasn't been grandma's pickle in decades, it's nostalgia in a corporate jar. Number 29. Tostitos salsa. There was a time when opening a jar of Tostitos meant finding chunks of tomato, onion, and peppers, something that at least looked homemade. Now, it pours out like baby food. That's because Frito-Lay doesn't make salsa anymore. They make a heat-treated puree built to survive a year on a warehouse shelf. In 2024, the FDA announced a recall of Tostitos avocado salsa after undeclared milk slipped into the mix. Allergens aside, the rest of their lineup isn't much safer for your blood pressure. 2 tablespoons, yes, tablespoons, of their medium salsa has around 270 milligrams of sodium, and that's before the chips. You'll also find xanthan gum, calcium chloride, and natural flavors, which in FDA language can mean anything from spice extract to chemical flavor boosters. What used to be a snack you could trust now feels like a science experiment with a label slapped on. The only thing fresh about Tostitos salsa anymore is the marketing budget. Number 28. Smucker's Jam. You remember those old Smucker's commercials? The ones that made you feel like every jar came from someone's grandma's kitchen? Big wooden table, red checkered cloth, sunshine pouring in. Back then, it actually tasted that way. You could see real fruit chunks and smell strawberries that didn't come from a lab. But open a jar today and it's a different story. The first thing you see on the label isn't fruit, it's sugar, corn syrup, and more sugar. The USDA Branded Foods Database lists roughly 12 grams of sugar per tablespoon, with 11 grams of that added, meaning you're spreading dessert on your toast and calling it breakfast. The fruit reduced to concentrate and natural flavor. Then there's the part nobody likes to talk about, the 2022 Jif peanut butter recall run by the same parent company. Exposed FDA sanitation failures and salmonella contamination inside their processing plant. Different product, same corner-cutting mindset. Smucker still cashes in on that family-friendly image, but the jar tells the truth. It's nostalgia reformulated for mass production. The fruit didn't disappear, the integrity did. Number 27. L and L homemade corn salsa. A lot of shoppers think buying from a small homemade brand means safer, fresher, and more natural. But sometimes it just means no one's watching. That's exactly what happened with L and L homemade corn salsa, a 16-ounce glass jar product that ended up on the FDA's recall list. In 2023, regulators flagged it after discovering it was not processed using safe canning procedures, creating conditions where Clostridium botulinum, the bacteria behind botulism, could grow. One spoonful of that toxin can paralyze you. The jars were sold locally at fairs and farm markets without acidification testing, temperature controls, or licensed cannery oversight. The kicker? Many people bought it precisely because the label said homemade. There's nothing wrong with supporting small business, but homestyle doesn't mean inspected. If a product is low acid and sealed airtight, it must be heat treated in a certified facility, period. So the next time a mason jar claims hand-packed freshness, remember this one. Safety doesn't care how charming the label looks. Number 26. Crosse and Blackwell. There was a time when seeing the Crosse and Blackwell label meant something. It carried the kind of prestige that made you think of London tea rooms, polished silver spoons, and real fruit preserves imported with care. But that reputation didn't survive modern cost-cutting. What used to be a premium brand has turned into another jar of syrupy filler. Most of their jellies now list high fructose corn syrup and sugar before you even get to the fruit. The so-called apple mint or red currant jellies are closer to liquid candy than anything that's seen on a farm. And this isn't a company new to cutting corners. In 2005, their Worcestershire sauce was yanked from shelves in Canada after it tested positive for Sudan I, an illegal red dye linked to cancer. That was a clear glimpse of how far quality control had slipped. Today, Crosse and Blackwell survives mostly on nostalgia, a respected name glued onto cheap ingredients. The jars look classy, but what's inside is just another sweetened shortcut wearing a British accent. Number 25. Red Shell Teriyaki Sauce. Red Shell used to be that secret restaurant hack, a quick drizzle that made weeknight stir-fry taste like a hibachi dinner. But those days are long gone. In April 2025, the company had to recall nearly 1,000 bottles of its teriyaki sauce in California after state inspectors found signs of possible microbial contamination, meaning bacteria could have been having a party in your fridge while you thought you were marinating dinner. The culprit? Sloppy processing and poor temperature control. That's not homemade Japanese flavor, that's food safety roulette. Even when it's not recalled, the ingredient list reads more like a science experiment. High fructose corn syrup, caramel color, hydrolyzed soy protein, and potassium sorbate. Basically, a lab-engineered sweet glaze designed to last forever, not a fresh sauce meant to elevate your food. Red Shell went from restaurant quality to risk in a bottle. If your teriyaki needs preservatives to survive the apocalypse, maybe it doesn't belong anywhere near your dinner. Number 24. Mezzetta Sliced Jalapenos and Olives. You'd think a brand that calls itself the joy of sharing would be serving up something worth sharing. But crack open a jar of Mezzetta today, and that joy disappears fast. In 2022, the company quietly yanked certain batches of its sliced jalapenos and green olives off shelves after glass shards were found inside. Yeah. Nothing says California sunshine like a side of broken glass with your nachos. Even the safe jars are a sodium trap, over 650 milligrams in a single ounce. That's more salt than flavor. The peppers lose their natural kick under a flood of calcium chloride and polysorbate 80, which are there to keep them looking perfect long after the flavor's gone. Mezzetta still clings to its family tradition since 1935 story, but these jars taste more like corporate chemistry than grandma's pantry. The label might scream artisan, but what's inside is mass-produced brine pretending to be gourmet. If you want real jalapeno heat, skip the jar and buy the pepper. Number 23. Kraft Old English Cheese Spread. Now listen, we all grew up with this one. It sat in the fridge door right next to the olives and leftover ham. Back then, Kraft Old English felt like a treat. Smooth, salty, spreadable cheese you could put on a cracker and call it a day. But here's the thing nobody wants to admit. It's not really cheese anymore. Legally, it's a pasteurized cheese food, meaning only about half of it is actual cheese. The rest is sodium phosphate, sorbic acid, and yellow 6-dye. That thick, creamy texture, it's engineered, not aged. 1 tablespoon gives you over 400 milligrams of sodium, and most folks don't stop at 1. Sure, it still spreads like the good old days, but what's inside the jar isn't the same recipe your parents bought in the 60 seconds. Kraft cut corners to make it shelf-stable for years, so while it might bring back memories, let's be honest. You're not spreading tradition anymore, you're spreading chemicals with a dash of nostalgia. Number 22. Aunt Nellie's Pickled Beets. Now this one hits close to home. Aunt Nellie's pickled beets have been a Sunday dinner staple for decades. You pop that lid, and the smell instantly takes you back to Grandma's kitchen. But if you've wondered why they taste sweeter now than they used to, here's why. Each half-cup serving packs over 25 grams of sugar, most of it from high fructose corn syrup, not the beets themselves. That's dessert-level sweet, hiding in a vegetable jar. And it doesn't stop there. To keep that glossy red color and syrupy texture, the company loads them with sodium benzoate and calcium chloride, two additives that make the beets look farm fresh while killing the real earthy flavor. They even cut costs by using beet pieces instead of full slices. Easier to jar, cheaper to make, worse to eat. So while Aunt Nellie's might remind you of better times, it's not the same recipe that graced the table 40 years ago. These days, it's less harvest from the garden and more candy factory in disguise. Number 21. Kraft Miracle Whip based jarred salads. If you've ever spotted those ready-to-eat salads in a jar made with Miracle Whip, you might think you're saving time, but what you're really doing is buying trouble sealed under a lid. These jarred potato and macaroni salads rely on the same Miracle Whip base Kraft's been pushing for decades, only now it's packed with calcium, disodium, EDTA, sorbic acid, and potassium sorbate to keep it fresh. That's not freshness. That's chemistry keeping spoiled mayo on life support. The real danger, though, is temperature. Once those jars sit on a warm delivery truck or grocery shelf for a few extra hours, the creamy dressing becomes a breeding ground for bacteria like Listeria and Salmonella. Even Kraft admits these products need to stay refrigerated at all times, yet they're often stored like canned goods. And nutritionally? Don't let the salad name fool you. A single serving can hit 300 calories and over 500 milligrams of sodium, mostly from dressing, not vegetables. It's not a shortcut, it's a slow road to regret, disguised as convenience. Number 20. Giorgio sliced mushrooms. At first glance, jarred mushrooms sound harmless. Just veggies and a little liquid, right? But Giorgio's sliced mushrooms are a reminder that not everything packed fresh stays safe in a jar. Mushrooms are a low-acid food, which means they need precise heat treatment to prevent dangerous bacteria like Clostridium botulinum. In 2022, certain Giorgio batches were voluntarily recalled after concerns that they hadn't been properly sterilized, a mistake that can lead to botulism, one of the most serious foodborne illnesses there is. Even when they're not recalled, the product itself is no winner. Each half-cup serving packs around 580 milligrams of sodium, and the flavor? More metallic brine than mushroom. The jar is loaded with citric acid, salt, and calcium chloride, giving them the chewiness of canned rubber instead of that earthy bite you expect from real mushrooms. Giorgio markets them as ready to use, but what you're really getting is a sterile-tasting, over-processed product that's been soaking in salt water for months. You'd get more flavor and less risk from a fresh pack of creminis. Number 19. Cucina Fresca smoked tomato sauce. At first glance, Cucina Fresca looks like one of those small batch artisan brands you'd find at Whole Foods. Sleek label, fancy name, and words like handcrafted and slow simmered. But back in 2012, they pulled a stunt that could have seriously hurt someone. The company accidentally mislabeled dozens of jars of their smoked tomato sauce that actually contained their vodka sauce, a version made with milk and cream. None of it was listed on the label. For anyone allergic to dairy, that's not a mistake, that's a trip to the ER. To their credit, Cucina Fresca recalled the batches, but it exposed how even so-called gourmet brands can mess up the basics of food safety. And while they're still around today, mostly in upscale grocery stores and health markets, the products aren't quite the fresh kitchen miracle the packaging promises. So sure, it's got the artisan vibe, but if you can't trust what's actually in the jar, the fancy script font doesn't mean much. Sometimes premium just means you'll pay more to be disappointed. Number 18. Emek Pistachio Cacao Cream. Now here's a jar that looks harmless, even fancy. Emek Pistachio Cacao Cream shows up in places like World Market and specialty grocers, often tucked between Nutella knockoffs and imported desserts. The label screams luxury. Pistachios, cacao, and kadaif, a Middle Eastern pastry twist. But in June 2025, the FDA announced that jars of this exact spread tested positive for salmonella, forcing a recall across multiple U.S. states. That's not a minor slip-up. Salmonella in a nut-based spread is a huge red flag. It means poor pasteurization, bad storage control, or contaminated nuts making it straight into the final product. And because these jars were distributed through boutique stores, they weren't tracked like major brands, meaning contaminated stock likely sat on shelves longer than it should have. So while the jar might look like a sweet import, what's inside could ruin your week. If you see Emek on a shelf, admire the packaging, then keep walking. It's a fancy name on a food safety failure. Number 17. Rouse chicken and gnocchi soup. Raul sells the restaurant night in a jar fantasy, but this one tripped on the basics. In early 2023, jars labeled chicken and gnocchi were found to actually contain vegetable minestrone, which includes egg. If you're allergic, that's not a flavor surprise, that's a health scare. And this wasn't a tiny boutique slip. These 16-ounce jars hit mainstream shelves in many states, the exact places folks grab a safe premium shortcut for dinner. The tell was obvious once opened. You expect a creamy pale chicken soup and instead stare at a tomato red minestrone with beans and pasta, not gnocchi. Why avoid? Because a premium brand that can't keep the label and contents on speaking terms fails the most basic trust test, especially when allergens are involved. If label control is sloppy, what else got missed on the line? Quick tip for our seniors. Before it hits the pot, glance at the color, look for gnocchi, not mixed pasta divided by beans, and skim the allergen line for egg. Premium price doesn't equal foolproof. Verify the jar. Number 16. Glaser All Raw Vegan Organic Salsa. This one looks squeaky clean. Miami-based Glaser sells a refrigerated handmade raw vegan salsa in small tubs that practically glow with health halo. But in October 2024, that glow shattered. The product was recalled for possible glass fragments. Glass in salsa isn't a quirky label error, it's a mouth and GI tract laceration risk, and the FDA classified it as a Class 2 hazard. The batch was sold at Florida retailers, which tells you two things. One, even artisan, organic, raw, isn't immune to packaging failures, and two, small batch plus minimal processing equals very little margin for error. Why avoid it? Because a raw refrigerated salsa has no real kill step. If your packaging line lets foreign material into the tub, that's a foundational QA miss. And if the basics aren't locked down, you shouldn't have to play dentist with tortilla chips. If you want a fresh, clean salsa, buy whole ingredients and blitz it yourself, or pick a brand with rock-solid QA and transparent recalls. Number 15. Taco Bell, branded salsa con queso. This one looked like a simple, crowd-pleasing dip for game night, until Kraft Heinz had to pull it from shelves nationwide. Back in 2018, the company issued a voluntary recall of the Taco Bell branded salsa con queso after the product began separating inside the jars during storage. That seemingly harmless separation wasn't just cosmetic. It created the kind of low-oxygen environment where Clostridium botulinum can form, the same bacteria responsible for botulism. Federal recall notices at the time described the issue as a potential growth condition for a toxin capable of causing paralysis or even death in severe cases. No confirmed illnesses were linked to the recall, but the incident drew attention to how shelf-stable dairy-style dips walk a fine line. These products rely on emulsifiers and stabilizers to keep oil and moisture bound together at room temperature. When that bond fails, the safety margin fails with it. The Taco Bell case highlighted just how risky long-life cheese dips can be when their formulation or storage environment drifts even slightly from ideal conditions. Number 14. Roland Lumpfish Caviar. Those glossy black and ruby pearls may look upscale, but the label tells a different story. Roland, a national import brand found in major grocery chains and online retailers, issued a recall in 2019 for its red and black lumpfish caviar after a processing deviation raised the risk of Clostridium botulinum contamination. Federal regulators warned that the deviation could allow conditions for the botulinum toxin to develop, the same paralyzing neurotoxin that defines one of the deadliest forms of foodborne illness. Even outside of recalls, jarred lumpfish caviar has more in common with food science than with fine dining. The product is typically saturated with salt, preserved using sodium benzoate or similar compounds, and dyed with artificial pigments to achieve that striking black or crimson sheen. Its long shelf life comes through heavy processing, and once opened, the texture of the eggs often collapses into a pasty consistency that loses the crisp pop associated with fresh roe. The Roland case underscored a broader truth about mass-market caviar substitutes. They're built for stability, not authenticity. Number 13. Skippy Peanut Butter. Skippy is one of those near-universal brands. School lunches, pantries, and late-night spoonfuls all trace back to it. But in 2022, the company halted distribution on part of its lineup after discovering potential stainless steel fragments from manufacturing equipment in certain jars. The recall wasn't small. It covered more than 9,000 cases, roughly 161,000 pounds of peanut butter distributed across multiple states. The affected products included reduced fat creamy, reduced fat chunky, and creamy with plant protein, precisely the health-conscious variants marketed as modern, improved takes on a classic spread. The issue stemmed from a mechanical failure in production, where a fragment of stainless steel could break off during processing and enter finished product batches. No injuries were reported, but the scale of the recall placed renewed attention on how even established, high-volume facilities remain vulnerable to physical contamination events. In industries measured by fractions of an inch, a single compromised component can trigger a nationwide pullback. For a legacy brand like Skippy, the 2022 recall served as a reminder of manufacturing fragility behind everyday staples. Number 12. Trader Joe's Genova Pesto. At first glance, it looked like a routine refrigerated dip, nothing unusual for Trader Joe's. But in May 2023, the company issued a recall after discovering that its Genova Pesto had been mistakenly packed into containers labeled hummus dip. The error meant the tubs failed to list key allergens actually present in the pesto, including milk and walnuts. For individuals with dairy or tree nut allergies, that kind of labeling mistake isn't minor, it's a direct health hazard. The product was manufactured by Bacavor USA, a supplier for Trader Joe's known for producing a range of refrigerated foods. Once the mislabeling was identified, the affected lots were pulled from distribution across multiple states. Federal recall reports described it as an isolated incident tied to a packaging mix-up during production, but it highlighted a recurring vulnerability in the refrigerated food sector: label control failures. Even items marketed as fresh, simple, or artisan are only as safe as their packaging accuracy. Number 11. Heinz Homestyle Gravy. Heinz Homestyle Gravy has long been positioned as an easy holiday shortcut, a ready-to-pour fix for mashed potatoes and roasts. But just before Thanksgiving a few years ago, the brand ran into an unexpected problem. Jars of Heinz Homestyle Bistro au Jus were mistakenly labeled as pork gravy, creating an undeclared allergen risk. The au jus recipe contained milk and soy, two allergens that were missing from the pork gravy label entirely. The mix-up was traced back to a packaging error that slipped through quality control during production. Once identified, Heinz pulled hundreds of cases from distribution, but the recall drew attention for more than just the timing. Allergen mislabeling isn't a printing issue, it's a compliance failure that can trigger medical emergencies for consumers relying on accurate ingredient lists. The incident reinforced how fragile labeling accuracy can be, even in high-volume automated facilities. For a legacy brand like Heinz, the recall served as another reminder that familiarity doesn't guarantee reliability. Number 10. Walgreens Nice Peach Slices and Mixed Fruit. In 2016, Walgreens' Nice line of fruit jars stopped being so nice. The peach slices and mixed fruit in 8-ounce glass jars were pulled nationwide after a customer reported finding glass fragments inside. The report came from just one jar, but that was enough to set off a full recall. Thousands of units cleared from shelves coast to coast. The products were supplied by Milky Way International Trading Corp., which admitted that the contamination likely occurred during the filling process. Walgreens issued refunds, told consumers to discard what they had, and moved fast to contain the problem. No injuries were confirmed, but the damage was already done. It was one of those recalls that didn't need a body count to make its point. Packaging failures don't care how ordinary the product is. A few shards in syrup, a small lapse in oversight, and the safest-looking shelf item suddenly carries a hidden edge. Number 9. Gerber Baby Foods. By 2021, even Gerber, the name most parents associate with trust, wasn't immune to scrutiny. A report from the U.S. House of Representatives revealed that several leading baby food manufacturers, Gerber among them, had sold products containing measurable levels of lead, arsenic, cadmium, and mercury. None of these metals are added intentionally. They enter through crops grown in contaminated soil and water. But the report made one point impossible to ignore. When the consumer weighs less than 20 pounds, trace amounts can mean something very different. In the years that followed, pressure mounted. By 2025, the FDA introduced its first formal action levels for lead in baby food, setting measurable thresholds designed to limit exposure. It was a long-awaited move, though experts noted that it didn't guarantee uniform safety. Testing still varies by crop, supplier, and batch. The Gerber case became shorthand for a bigger issue in modern food production: legacy trust colliding with the realities of industrial agriculture. The labels still promise purity, But the data told a more complicated story, one where even the smallest spoonful came with invisible baggage. Number 8. Trader Joe's applesauce. Applesauce was supposed to be the safest thing in the grocery aisle. But in 2017, Trader Joe's pulled 3 of its unsweetened applesauce varieties after customers reported finding glass fragments inside the jars. 2 of the affected types, organic unsweetened and First Crush Gravenstein, were sold nationwide. A 3rd version covered parts of the West and South. The jars were produced by a contract manufacturer who admitted a failure in the glass packaging line. Within days, Trader Joe's cleared shelves and issued a refund notice, calling it a precautionary recall. But the context mattered. This wasn't gourmet sauce or niche import. It was the kind of product parents hand to toddlers and caretakers spoon out in nursing homes. A few small shards in a product meant for the most vulnerable consumers didn't just raise quality concerns, it raised questions about how something so basic could still go wrong. Apples, sugar, glass, and oversight. That's all it took to turn one of the most ordinary foods in America into another recall headline. Number 7. Clover Valley Instant Coffee. In August 2025, Dollar General quietly issued a recall that reached nearly every state in the country. The company pulled 3 lots of its Clover Valley Instant Coffee, sold in 8-ounce glass jars, after discovering the product could contain glass fragments. The recall notice, posted through the FDA, listed more than 48 affected states and advised customers to discard the jars immediately. The contamination was traced to a packaging failure during production, fine glass particles that could chip off inside the jar and end up in the powder. No injuries were confirmed, but the incident echoed a familiar pattern. Another low-cost, mass-produced staple undermined by a manufacturing oversight. Instant coffee isn't supposed to carry a physical hazard warning, yet this one did. The brand's recall joined a growing list of glass-related food safety lapses in recent years, showing how even basic pantry goods can stumble at the simplest step, keeping the container intact. Number 6. Wegmans Italian Classics Diavolo Pasta Sauce. Wegmans is one of those stores people don't second guess. You see that clean label, the gold script, the words Italian Classics Diavolo, and it just feels safe, like the kind of pasta sauce that couldn't possibly go wrong. But in 2023, it did. Behind the jar's spotless design was a quiet recall that didn't make many headlines. Anchovies had slipped into the sauce, but never made it onto the label. That one missing word was enough to turn a weeknight dinner into a health risk for anyone with a fish allergy. The supplier, Lee Destry Foods, said it was a labeling mix-up, nothing more. But when you're dealing with allergens, nothing more can mean a trip to the ER. It wasn't a contamination scare, no salmonella, no glass shards, just the kind of invisible mistake that gets buried in fine print and recall lists. A single ingredient, never listed, hiding behind a brand built on trust. Wegmans fixed it, sure. Number 5. Aldi Happy Farms cream cheese. It's easy to trust something like cream cheese. It's mild, it's familiar, and it's one of those products that feels too simple to ever go wrong. But in 2024, Aldi's Happy Farms cream cheese spreads were pulled from shelves nationwide after tests flagged possible salmonella contamination. The recall covered almost every variety: plain, whipped, strawberry, chive, and onion, even garden vegetable, all produced by Schreiber Foods, the supplier behind many of Aldi's private labeled dairy items. It wasn't a rumor or an overreaction. It was a bacterial risk tied directly to the production line. No confirmed illnesses, but that didn't make it any less serious. For a brand built on affordability and convenience, the recall hit at the heart of what people take for granted, that sealed, refrigerated foods are safe by default. But the truth is simpler and scarier. It only takes one slip in sanitation or temperature control to compromise thousands of tubs at once. Number 4. Erewhon Jarred Soups. Erewhon built its name on purity. The kind of grocery store that sells glass jars instead of cans, soups that look homemade, and ingredients you can pronounce. It's the Los Angeles version of clean eating. Expensive, minimal, and supposedly bulletproof. But in 2018, even Erewhon cracked. California health officials ordered a recall of every Erewhon jarred soup. All flavors, all sizes, after finding the jars could foster the growth of Clostridium botulinum, the bacteria that causes botulism. The issue wasn't one bad batch or a stray lid, it was the entire method. These soups were being sold in Mason-style jars, low-acid foods sealed tight without proper pressure treatment. In other words, the perfect environment for a deadly toxin to brew. No illnesses were reported, but the message landed hard. Erewhon's image, fresh, safe, chemical-free, was exactly what made this hit differently. People paid top dollar for pure, only to learn that purity, without science behind it, can be just as dangerous. A jar of soup marketed as wellness ended up recalled for the same reason the FDA exists in the first place. Number 3. Pickle Me Everything. The name alone sounded playful. Pickle Me Everything. A small California brand selling colorful jars of pickled vegetables across local markets and organic shops. Bright labels, glass jars, that homemade charm people trust instantly. But in 2024, California health officials told everyone to stop eating it immediately. Every jar from the line was recalled after tests showed the pickled vegetables had been improperly processed, creating the right conditions for botulism, one of the most dangerous foodborne toxins known. It wasn't about taste or expiration dates, it was about pressure and pH. The company had been sealing low-acid foods in airtight glass jars without industrial-level safeguards, turning farm fresh into a potential biohazard. No illnesses were reported, but the warning was blunt. Throw it all out. The recall spread fast through northern and central California, pulling products from farmers markets and boutique shelves. The brand had promised everything pickled. It delivered a reminder instead that charm, nostalgia, and a mason jar don't replace science. Number 2. Jose Madrid Salsa. Jose Madrid Salsa built its image on small batch charm, a local Ohio company selling hand-packed jars that looked more homemade than factory-made. But in 2015, that image cracked. Health officials ordered a recall of the brand's mild salsa after discovering some jars might not have sealed properly, creating the risk of botulism. The warning came from a simple truth. Salsa isn't as safe as it looks. It's a mix of vegetables and low-acid ingredients sealed in glass, and without the right temperature or pressure, it can turn from snack to neurotoxin. The recall stretched through Zanesville, Ohio, and parts of Maryland, pulling jars from shelves and market stalls that had stocked the local favorite. No illnesses were confirmed, but it was enough to shake confidence in a brand built on trust and flavor. Jose Madrid wasn't a corporate giant, it was the kind of label you find at fairs and roadside stands. And that's what made the recall sting. The homemade look that drew people in was the same thing that almost turned dangerous. Number 1. Alfez Natural Tahini. Tahini isn't the kind of food anyone worries about. It's sesame seeds, ground to a paste, sitting quietly in a jar, the kind of natural product that feels safe by default. But in 2024, that sense of calm cracked. The company behind Alfez Natural Tahini announced a nationwide recall after routine testing uncovered salmonella contamination in its glass jars. The recall covered 5.6-ounce jars stamped with best before the 11th of July 2024. And beyond, thousands of units already shipped to retailers across the country. No illnesses were confirmed, but that didn't make it any less serious. Tahini's not a product you cook or reheat. It's eaten straight, which means any bacteria that makes it in stays in. For a brand built on clean labels and Mediterranean authenticity, the incident hit at the heart of its image. What's supposed to be pure, simple, and safe became one more example of how even the most innocent-looking jar can carry a hidden threat. But if you thought avoiding all jarred foods you see from now on was the right move, think again. Because here are 10 jarred food brands, which you actually can let your guard down. Number 10. Justin's. Justin's started out in Boulder, Colorado, with one guy grinding nut butters in his kitchen and selling them at local markets. Fast forward, and the brand's now sitting in Target, Whole Foods, Walmart, Costco, and even Starbucks, a national name that still leans on its original promise. Simple ingredients, minimal junk. Their classic almond butter lists just 2 ingredients: roasted almonds and a touch of palm oil. No hydrogenated oils, no stabilizers, no artificial flavoring. The average jar gives around 6 grams of protein per serving, with a healthy fat profile and no added sugar in the original version. There have been a couple of small recalls in the brand's history, one in 2013 over potential metal fragments, and another in 2012 tied to a supplier contamination issue, but both were contained, short-lived, and reported 0 injuries. In an industry where massive recalls are routine, that track record stands out. Justin's earned its reputation the hard way, by scaling nationally without compromising what made it work in the first place. Clean sourcing, short ingredient lists, and production that hasn't once landed it in scandal headlines. Number 9. Primal Kitchen. Primal Kitchen wasn't built to be a condiment brand. It was built as a rebellion. Founded by Mark Sisson, one of the early voices in the paleo movement, the company took aim at the kind of mayonnaise and dressings people had quietly learned to distrust. The promise was simple. No seed oils, no dairy, no artificial preservatives, just avocado oil, cage-free eggs, and ingredients you could actually pronounce. Today, Primal Kitchen sits on shelves in Walmart, Target, Costco, Whole Foods, and Kroger, a nationwide brand owned by Kraft Heinz since 2018, but still running its production under strict clean label standards. Their flagship avocado mayo clocks in at about 100 calories per tablespoon, 0 added sugar, and monounsaturated fats instead of the cheap polyunsaturated ones that dominate traditional mayo. And here's the thing. Since launching in 2015, Primal Kitchen hasn't faced any major public recalls. No glass, no allergens, no contamination scares, just steady growth built on ingredient transparency. In a category notorious for hidden additives and misleading labels, Primal Kitchen pulled off something rare: mainstream scale without losing its identity. Number 8. Saffron Road. Barilla is one of the first names that come up when you talk about pasta sauce. That's part of its strength and its risk. Their jarred sauces, things like premium traditional tomato, tomato and basil, and marinara, are framed as cleaner options. No added sugar, no artificial flavors or colors, often made with extra virgin olive oil and herbs. On the nutrition side, a 125-gram serving of their traditional sauce clocks in at about 60 calories, with minimal fat and a few grams of protein. That's solid for a tomato base. No big national scandals over jarred sauce are currently tied to Barilla, which helps it slip under the trusted brand radar. But it's not perfect. Some consumers and advocacy groups have pushed back against labeling practices. For example, a lawsuit claimed that Barilla markets certain sauces as no preservatives, even though they include citric acid, a known acidity regulator divided by preservative. So Barilla sits in that middle ground. A brand with name power, relatively clean ingredient lines, decent nutritional values, and a mostly clean safety record. Not untouchable, but in the sauce aisle, one of the safer bets. Number 7. Muir Glen. Muir Glen sits in that sweet spot between corporate reach and farmers market credibility. It's owned by General Mills, but built its name on organic farming and cleaner ingredients long before organic became a marketing buzzword. Every one of their jarred and canned tomato products, sauces, crushed tomatoes, fire-roasted blends, carries the USDA organic seal, and most come from California's Sacramento Valley, where they control their entire growing and packing process. Nutritionally, their organic marinara sauce averages about 60 calories per half cup, with no added sugar and only 3.5 grams of fat, all from olive oil. Sodium is moderate for the category, and the ingredient list reads like an actual recipe. Tomatoes, olive oil, onions, garlic, basil, nothing more exotic than that. In more than 2 decades on store shelves, Muir Glen has had no major recalls or contamination incidents. No glass, no allergens, no metal. Just consistent, traceable product from field to jar. It's not boutique or flashy. It's the rare example of a big company brand that still behaves like a small, honest one. Number 6. Bio Nature. Bio Nature is what happens when organic actually means something. Founded in Tuscany in 1995, the brand built its entire identity around small-scale Italian sourcing. Real tomatoes, real olive oil, no shortcuts. Their jarred pasta sauces are imported directly from Italy and made in small batches using traditional methods, then bottled in glass to preserve both color and flavor. You'll find them in Whole Foods, Sprouts, Wegmans, and natural grocers nationwide, and they've earned that quiet reputation as the brand people discover once they've grown tired of Italian-style sauces made in New Jersey. Nutritionally, the sauces are among the cleanest in the aisle, about 45 to 60 calories per half cup, no added sugar, low in sodium, and made with extra virgin olive oil instead of soybean or canola. The ingredients read like a grocery list: tomatoes, carrots, onions, garlic, basil, no thickeners, no colorants, no preservatives. In nearly 3 decades, Bio Nature hasn't faced a single major U.S. recall or contamination issue. It's one of the rare jarred brands that actually lives up to its packaging: organic, imported, and unbothered by scandal. Number 5. Whole Foods' 365. Whole Foods built its empire on trust, and 365 is that trust turned into a brand. It's the store's private label, the version of everyday pantry items that's supposed to make better, affordable. And in the jarred food world, it mostly delivers. The 365 pasta sauces, salsas, and nut butters are produced under Whole Foods' own quality standards, which ban 130-plus artificial ingredients, including high fructose corn syrup, hydrogenated fats, and synthetic preservatives. Their organic tomato basil pasta sauce, for example, comes in at around 60 calories per half cup, with no added sugar, no coloring, and a sodium level about 20% lower than most mainstream competitors. Since the brand's expansion nationwide in the mid-2010s, 365 has maintained a remarkably clean record. No major contamination, glass, or allergen recalls attached to its jarred products. For a line this broad, that's rare. It's not gourmet, and it's not trying to be. Number 4. Earth's Best. Earth's Best is one of those brands that parents have trusted for decades without thinking twice. It was founded in 1985, long before organic became mainstream, and it built an entire business on one promise: baby food made without pesticides, preservatives, or synthetic additives. Today, it's owned by Heinz Celestial, but the mission hasn't changed much. Glass jars filled with simple blends like carrots, peas, sweet potatoes, and pears, all USDA organic and non-GMO certified. Nutritionally, Earth's Best keeps it stripped down. Their Stage 2 fruit and veggie purees usually sit at 35 to 60 calories per jar, with no added sugar or salt, and nothing artificial hiding on the back label. The jars themselves are BPA-free, and most ingredients are sourced from certified organic farms in the US and Europe. Across nearly 4 decades, Earth's Best has had no widespread safety or contamination recalls on its core jarred baby food line, a rarity in the industry. Number 3. Allen's. Allen's is one of those legacy food brands that's been around so long, most people forget it's still quietly stocking shelves. Founded in 1,926 Inches, Arkansas, the company built its name on jarred and canned vegetables, green beans, sweet potatoes, collard greens, the kind of southern pantry staples that defined comfort food before comfort food was even a phrase. The brand is now part of Seneca Foods, which took over after Allen's filed for bankruptcy in 2013. But through all that change, the products themselves never really slipped. The company modernized its facilities, switched to BPA-free packaging, and kept ingredient lists short: vegetables, water, salt. That's it. Nutritionally, Allen's jarred and canned vegetables hold up surprisingly well. Low in fat, high in fiber, and around 25 to 60 calories per serving, depending on the vegetable. And unlike many long-running grocery brands, Allen's hasn't faced any major contamination or nationwide recalls on its jarred vegetables in recent decades. Number 2. Del Monte. Del Monte is a brand many associate with cans, peaches, pears, green beans, but it also dips its toes into jarred fruit lines in certain markets. Glass jars of peaches, fruit mixes in syrup. For most people, those jars seem like safe bets. Vintage, stable, classic. In its long history, Del Monte hasn't exactly been scandal-free. Most of its recalls have targeted canned goods or fresh produce, not widely publicized jar failures. For instance, in 2018, 64,242 cases of Fiesta corn cans were recalled for underprocessing, which could allow microbial growth. No reported illnesses, but it was a red flag. In domestic U.S. market surveillance, there's no major documented recall of Del Monte's jarred fruit products, peaches, mixes in recent years. That gives them an edge where trust is vital. Still, minor issues linger. Phthalate testing by Consumer Reports flagged, bottled, and canned Del Monte sliced peaches for elevated levels of plastic chemicals. Not acute safety, but something to watch. Number 1. Bon Maman. Bon Maman doesn't look like a corporation. It looks like something you'd find in a French pantry: gingham lid, handwritten label, glass jar full of jam. That presentation isn't fake nostalgia. The brand, founded in France in 1971, still uses whole fruit, cane sugar, and no artificial preservatives, colors, or high fructose corn syrup. Every jar is made with simple ingredients: strawberries, sugar, lemon juice, pectin, and nothing that needs a chemistry degree to decode. The average serving 1 tablespoon lands at around 50 calories, with 13 grams of sugar and a bit of natural fruit fiber. is not health food, but it's honest food, real fruit cooked down, not reconstituted concentrate. In over 50 years of global distribution, Bon Maman has had no major food safety recalls or contamination events linked to its preserves or jellies. The jars are still glass, still sealed in Europe, and still run through rigorous quality checks before export.